Ahoy! I'm Captain Happy, and this is a video about the current state of Warhammer 40k Darktide. I'll be talking about the game as a whole, giving some positives and negatives, then giving some needed change suggestions. And as usual, I will be focusing largely on user experience, as the inner workings of a game mean nothing if the user experiences it poorly. Darktide recently underwent a big update that elevated the game to what some would call a finally playable status. There were many things that you would not only expect from the genre, but of the development team behind Vermintide to have included, now thrown in with this update. The game is at a point of being very fun, but still has a way to go before it's carking excellent. Now, I'm going to be largely using games such as Left 4 Dead and Vermintide 2 as examples, as they are the games most closely related to Darktide, especially given that Vermintide 2 is made by the same developer, Fatshark. Comparisons here will be very apt. Okay, so I want to take some time here to talk about the positives about the Darktide experience and its most recent update. Not only to make this video less about me complaining, but also to give you a better feel for the kind of game it is and what it does right with the genre. Firstly, I have to hand it to the new talent trees. This is by far the thing the game needed the most, and frankly one of the biggest factors keeping me from playing it up until this point. Character or class diversity since its introduction into the genre after Valve's Left 4 Dead by games such as Vermintide and Back 4 Blood has quickly become a staple. A multiplayer co-op survival game is only elevated by a healthy group dynamic, and this game now finally follows its predecessor with not only 4 different characters, but with 3 distinct ways to build each, effectively giving us 12 characters to choose from. This gives the player agency to make choices and to feel the effects of their choices, especially when partnered with peers that use differing builds, working off of each other and creating a party dynamic. This is very important to a healthy user experience in just about any title, but here, it serves as a cornerstone to the player's ability to actually conceptualize and create coherent party dynamics with themselves and their friends. This update breathes a lot of life into what was otherwise a stale product. On the topic of diversity, let's briefly discuss enemies, as this game contains a swath of different enemies, all with their own unique challenges. Unlike other games in the genre, such as Left 4 Dead, which would primarily throw the same zombie at the players, with some exceptions, as well as occasionally tossing a special monster in at the players, Fatshark turned this up to 11 in their titles, Vermintide and Vermintide 2. In these games, there are multiple different normal enemies the player will face, as well as many more exception types, now referred to as elites, and a healthy amount of specials. Darktide does this in spades, with the addition of common ranged units and varying types. With Darktide being a largely futuristic game as compared to Vermintide, it's only fitting that firearms play a bigger role in combat. And carkin' hell does it improve gameplay! While Left 4 Dead had more of a gun focus and Vermintide had more of a melee focus, Darktide settles itself into a very nice middle ground, with both featuring prominently in both the player's and enemies' hands. The inclusion of ranged enemies changes combat to now be played in 2 primary states, ranged or melee. Ranged units add a secondary layer to the combats that allow not only for the players to swap between the combat states, but also to work as a team and diversify, specializing in them. Ranged threats are dangerous, but that doesn't mean melee loses focus or power simply because the ranged weaponry exists. And this is one of the keys to it all being so satisfying. Enemies have battle tactic and go into the different states just like players do. See, one of the absolutely mind-blowingly awesome things they decided to include in this title is tabletop game elements such as tactic, unit cohesion, and suppression. This literally improves the shooter genre as a whole. You might be thinking, how do they add elements from a tabletop game into a shooter game and make it work, let alone improve the whole shooter genre? Well, I'll tell you, enemy units. No, not a singular enemy, a unit of enemies that work together, fight, and operate together. When one character of a unit sees and begins to engage upon an enemy, they all do. When the unit is shot at a lot, or when one or more of them are killed by gunfire, the unit becomes suppressed, fearing for their lives and running for cover. When an enemy, the player, approaches the unit, they all put their firearms away to pull out melee weapons to engage. These are all aspects of the tabletop game seamlessly integrated into a shooter game, and it works so damn well I now expect every shooter game in the future, regardless of genre, to include these enemy behaviors. This changes the game. Unit diversity and combat tactics employable by both them and the player elevate this game genre to new heights it's never seen before, and I'm excited at the prospective future this promises for games such as this. The diversity this game offers doesn't stop there. With weapons having a large selection and variations upon the selections, this game includes 3 versions of almost every weapon, with the different versions being slight tweaks on the swing patterns, stat allocations, and prospective uses or styles. This, when compared to their previous title, Vermintide 2, is a massive step up in player choice and combat style customization, truly allowing the player to fight their way. Then, after the weapon differentiation, there's the blessings and perks that can be applied to them, adding extra layers of customization, which is always nice. I do have to say, though, that this is where the praise ends, as it is with weapons and their randomized nature that the faults of this game come crashing into the player like an ogre trying to get to the bathroom. Weapon selection, customization, stats, leveling up, and upgrades are all out of whack and frankly lead to a frustrating time for the player. Stats on the weapons to begin with are randomized, which isn't too bad until you understand exactly how random they are. Each weapon comes with 5 distinct stat measures that change or improve their effectiveness in different areas when compared to similar weapons, as well as being the primary measure of a weapon's level when compared to the same weapon. However, as you can see by this example here, damage is not actually linked to the weapon's real damage value, effectively being a different value that is also randomized. Weapons and curios also increase in stat value based on character level when purchased, which means that for a player to be able to get a weapon with the best possible stats, they have to save their currencies until they hit max level, effectively making the shop a trap until that point. So with each of the stats randomizing as well as the damage value, we then have the randomization of both perks and blessings that the weapon obtains as it improves in quality level, referred to as consecration. Each of these present 2 unique quality or stat changes. These qualities or stat changes come in 4 levels of power. You can change out up to 2 of these for ones of your choosing, but then the other 2 are locked in. These weapons are obtained either by randomly obtaining one at the end of a mission or via the armory, which stocks a random selection every hour or provides you with a not-so-cheap base level weapon of your choice with randomized stats. These options feel not so dissimilar to playing the lottery. This all effectively means that in order to prospectively get a max quality weapon, you need to not only be max level and randomize a weapon into existence that has next to perfect stats, including the unknowable damage value, but then you need to play a secondary lottery on the perks and blessings that it randomizes as you pour your precious materials into improving its quality level. You need to randomize 2 level 4 perks or blessings that are effective for you, your weapon, and your playstyle, as only 2 of them can be changed. Now, let's say you do actually miraculously manage to do that. Now you need to change out the other perk and blessing. But here's where it gets even more complicated, as you now need to find the blessing you want on your weapon, as unlike perks that come pre-unlocked, you need to discover all of the blessings in the game. Mind you, the blessing unlocks are per weapon, so you'll have to repeat this whole process if you want to try a different weapon, even if the blessings are the same. So, how do you do this? By finding a consecrated weapon that has the blessing that you want, and that's assuming it's the level 4 version of it, purchasing it, and then destroying it to extract and unlock the blessing. Can't find it in the store or don't want to wait countless hours for a weapon with the perk to show up? You can make one by spending a grand total of 9,200 Dockets, 1,407 plasteel, and 412 diamantum per try. There is also no way to obtain the latter 2 of those materials aside from chancing upon it while exploring. You see the problem here? There are way too many layers of randomization and lotteries that can result in the player flushing hard-to-find materials down the proverbial toilet. This leads to a frustrating time for players and paints a path that drives many players to say, "I don't want to do that," and decide to not play the game anymore. To fix this glaring issue, we can look to their previous title, Vermintide 2, for a solution that is actually fairly simple, but first we need to figure out what the issue actually is before we can tackle a fix properly. While the frustration points come from an obvious overarching presence of randomization and lottery features, these features are present in other games that don't frustrate the player. So, what's the problem? And better yet, what's the solution? The issue here is not actually the several layers of randomization, believe it or not, but actually that there is no circumvention for this at the highest levels of play. See, Vermintide 2 has some of the very same levels of randomization, but it is remedied to the player by the amazing and awesome obtainment of a super rare quality level 5 weapon, which makes any stat on the weapon always be maximum. This right here is the part that is missing from Darktide. At the highest levels of play, players are subject to every form of the randomization, and that shouldn't be. At max level, no player wants to diddle around with basic randomization in any game, especially when there are 2 more levels of randomization upon that. Players at the top levels of play should have the opportunity to earn a way to circumvent the most basic natures of randomization in a game, in this case, the base stats. There should be, in Darktide, a 5th level of consecration not available for creation to the player that always has maximum base stats. That way the player can be assured that upon finding this item, that it has the best base stats on it, and that the only thing the player needs to randomize is the blessings and the perks. This added level of circumvention for the player acts as a comfort and effective reward for not only being at the highest levels of play, but for playing it. Players like being rewarded. It activates those monkey neurons and sends dopamine throughout the brain. This is what you want your game to do at all times. It's game design 101 here, people. Player plays a high difficulty mission at max level and finds at the end a weapon of a different quality level than they have equipped, one that promises a maximum level of effectiveness and a chance at building a meaningfully impactful weapon that maximizes your playstyle. Hot dog, those are some neurons firing, I tell you what. Now this leads me into the next pain point the game has to offer, and that's loot. Not that it doesn't exist, but that it's not presented to me in a way that really feels like a reward. That endgame screen needs a lot of work. This is where I'm going to get largely user experience focused, as the game provides much of the mechanical design behind the curtains. And that's why it's so good, despite being missing so many things. The endgame screen, for example, is absolutely uninspired, uninvolving, vapid experience that doesn't bring the player into what is trying to be conveyed. This screen is supposed to be about seeing your performance at the end of the level and receiving your experience, dockets, materials picked up throughout the level, and an item. The little boxes in the center of the screen are not very involving to the player and go away to make room for the next one. The only thing the player is really watching is the experience bar move up, as it's the only consistent asset with any movement or effect on it. By the time the item shows up, should the player even care, it's presented in the same bland manner as the rest of the information, and by that time the player is probably still mashing the continue button in an effort to regain control of their character and queue up for the next mission. This is terrible on so many fronts, it's hard to start somewhere. So first, let's address the presentation of the information. These small windows that come flying onto and off of the screen are frankly a terribly uninvolving and aesthetically abhorrent design. This information should be presented in one large, continuous window that stays on the screen until the player chooses to close it after the stats have stopped their animations for counting up, which should all happen at the same time. This information being presented to the player throughout the larger duration of this screen is paramount, as it's half the reason we're here. The other half being the item we obtain. A great example can be drawn from Fatshark's previous title, Vermintide 2, in which at the end of a level, the player is presented with a fun and involving animation in which a chest improves in quality for various reasons, notably involving the things the player did, which I will get into later. This reward and the way it's presented to the player via an active animation that involves the player with things they did during the level is an infallibly perfect way of doing, well, everything. Darktide needs to adopt this idea of how to present its rewards to the player. At the end of each level, the player should be presented with a small containment unit that is then increased in size by the various things they have done throughout the level, including team performance, that then immediately opens to reveal the item that the player would normally have received anyways. The difference this makes is insurmountable in the effect it has on the player not only feeling properly rewarded, but also how invested they feel in both their gameplay and the item they have received. When there is a visibly causal link between action and reward, the connection between the reward and the receiver is stronger. That leads me well into the next negative the game still holds, and that's a lack of ability to make the player care for things. As a player, when I am presented with an alternative choice such as collect the hidden items or kill the alternative boss, I want there to be a reason to care about doing that. As far as is presented to the player in a cohesive manner, there is no direct reward for performing extra tasks or feats. Sure, grabbing the grimoires gives a bit of extra dockets at the end of the mission and scriptures more experience, but the end screen is so blandly presented that I barely get the chance to register that that occurred. Not to mention that at max level, the experience the scriptures give you is pointless, but we'll get back to that. Killing demon hosts or even regular bosses has no discernible reward, and so a player is more likely to skip the boss out of boredom or lack of reward rather than out of fear of the fight and the potential trade-off of engaging with it. Taking Vermintide 2 as an example again, the boss creatures drop a collectible item called a loot dice that, at the end of the level, visibly adds to the quality of reward received in a very fun and standout way that involves the player by taking their actions throughout the level into account. Darktide needs to adopt a similar idea. I understand that mayhaps the decision to remove the loot dice was so the player didn't need to actually look down and take the time to obtain it. This is understandable, but has removed the player's ability to be actively involved in their reward system. Either a similar loot dice object needs to be added, or a large pop-up message, or even a voice call from Hadron that congratulates the player and tells them that they will be receiving a bigger reward for their actions. This change will make the player feel like their actions have impact, and will make them more likely to engage with alternative choices, such as engaging with a demon host. As for the books, this needs one fundamental change. Books need to be present in every single mission, with scriptures being available in difficulties 1 through 3 and grimoires in difficulties 4 and 5. Low-level players are detrimented greatly with the burden of a grimoire, and have little need for the extra dockets it provides. Conversely, a max-level player has absolutely no use for the extra experience a scripture provides. The extra objective is, and I do not stretch the truth here even a little, absolutely necessary for the game experience to be the best it can possibly be. Players need an alternative objective, and when there's a mission with only one thing to do, the players will beeline for that very thing and forsake everything else the game has to offer. This creates a bad mentality within the players to effectively ignore large portions of the game and promotes a casual speedrun behavior that can be lethal to a player base. It may seem like a small thing, but the ripple effect it has is massive. Now, with that massive mountain out of the way, we can talk about different player-facing things. Let's begin with the loadout screen, which is not too bad of a start. The weapons are plainly presented on the left-hand side with the 3 equipable curios underneath them. Pressing on either of these assets will bring the player into a menu in which they can change the equipped item. Hovering over any item on either of these screens presents the player with the item's stats in a big, clear-to-see window. This is all presented fairly cleanly and doesn't need too much improvement, but there is something very poignantly missing. The player has no way of viewing their character's cumulative stats. It's more than a little bothersome that, after equipping a bunch of items that increase various stats, I do not have a way of seeing the measure of those stats in a numerical manner, and therefore not much of an ability to determine the value of said stats or their applied effects. I can't even see on any screen other than being in-game how much toughness or HP I have after having equipped items that add to them. There's no way of seeing how much combined stat improvements are given to you across multiple items unless you go around and do the math. I shouldn't have to do the math myself in a video game. There should be a stat screen that I can flip to in the loadout menu to see the stats of my character, and not just HP and toughness, but every stat that can change. That level of detail on the weapon inspection screen? Do that for the player character. Still on the topic of the loadout screen, let's talk about the cosmetics. No, not the player cosmetics, though we'll get to that. I'm talking about weapon cosmetics. I have a few points, so bear with me here. For one, the 2 cosmetics for each weapon available in the commissary are, well, let's just say they aren't fantastic, as they are just 2 versions of the same skin coloring on the level 1 version of the weapon variant only. Sometimes a different variant entirely, but are 2 versions of the same thing. This is the only choice for alternative weapon design, as the cash shop doesn't sell many weapon skins at all, nor are the weapon skins impactfully extravagant at all, leaving the buyer feeling empty with their purchase. But I'm getting ahead of myself. The weapons all come with different designs, different sights, and different feels to them. What if I like the design and sights on a Mark II model, but the stats of the Mark III? The purchasable skin looks like the Mark I, so I can only choose between the 1 or the 3. This is disappointing, as the system is in place. The pieces of the puzzle are all on the table, it just needs to be put together and expanded upon. The commissary should sell weapon skins of all kinds, as weapon skins are not seen by other players as easily or often. The ability for a player to show off a cool weapon skin is minimal in comparison to their ability to show off a purchase that changes their whole character model. As such, weapons should be exclusively a commissary purchase for Ordo Dockets to give all players a place to find things to aspire to and reward their own progress by obtaining. Plus, this creates a money sink, which is something very necessary in games that not many developers consider. Overall, the players will have a much better experience with progression if they are able to choose rewards like that, and reward the player for their efforts via a reward. You see that key word there? There needs to be a consistent reward track for players to be able to follow and draw from for them to feel both invested in the game and like they want to continue at all. If there's no extra rewards for a player after hitting max level, then why would they play? The gameplay, sure, but as with any stagnant game experience, it gets stale quickly. A reward for players after reaching max level is necessary for the longevity of a title. Looking back at the loot and loot progression systems, we can see that the developer seems to have included these convolutedly RNG-based walls in an effort to keep the players playing until they get their best of the best weapons after however long it takes to make that miracle happen. This is ineffective at achieving the goal of player retention, and I want the developers to know that. What you need to do is create money sinks in the form of awesome rewards that the player can receive. This will keep the old players playing and give the new ones goals to aspire to aside from going up in level, much like how the outfits sold in the commissary do. Which brings me to how absolutely, gut-wrenchingly, barf-inducing some of the cosmetic items available to the player are. Not necessarily the ones available in the commissary, those are meh to ooh at best, but I'm talking about the ones available by completing challenges for each of the characters called penances. See, penances are like achievements, side goals ranging from mind-numbingly menial to obscenely difficult, that often reward the player for completing them. These rewards, in Darktide's case, are cosmetics and points. Which, may I take a moment to address these points? They mean nothing to me as a player. I can't use them anywhere. They don't appear in any way that faces the other players, and is essentially just a pointlessly arbitrary number for me to look at and say, wow, that sure is a number. There should be something I can do with these points, such as a track of small rewards like titles or frames, literally anything tangible that I can say, I have this because of my penance points. Because without them, the rewardless penances have little weight to the player and gives them no reason to do them. But anyhow, getting back to the penances that do have cosmetics as rewards, why do half of them look like terrible, downtrodden versions of a prisoner's outfit? Why aren't the rewards for doing hard things cool looking? And conversely, why do the rewards for simple progression look so fantastical? It's very odd to see that dichotomy, as erratically implemented as it is, as this makes the players not want to go for half of the rewards and makes the progression feel cheap and vapid. When the player is rewarded through simple progression, an outfit that outclasses something that they had to complete a hard challenge for, it devalues not only the reward, but the effort it took to obtain it. Just look at— Hey, Editor Happy here. Sorry, I kind of rant here for a bit about the cosmetic shop and the deplorable practices, but nobody really wants to hear that, so let's just skip to the end where I actually make a point. Take some of those trashy, garbage items and make them available in the commissary for absurdly huge docket prices. Make players work for looking different, and make them feel like their time invested in the game was worth it. Sell the really cool ones in the cash shop to keep the exclusivity, and make those players feel like spending their money on it was worth it. This will help improve not only player perception of reward, but give them more and better goals to strive toward, as well as change the fact that there's literally only 2 outfits available to free players with like 12 variants. Seriously, this needs the improvement. But now finally to talk about the resources. Ordo Dockets, which is like an in-game money, and then you've got plasteel and diamantine. Crafting materials qualities 1 and 2. Don't know why there needs to be 2 of them, but it'd be like that. The dockets come to you at a semi-decent rate at about 1 to 3 guns worth depending on the difficulty of the mission. But the other 2 come at a rate much slower than they are used. This creates a problem where in order for a player to play the gun lottery we spoke about earlier, they would need to succeed in about 4 missions to afford 1 try at a blessing. This is an extreme imbalance and only exacerbates the above-mentioned problems. The problem here is clear and can be remedied with a simple fix. This is where the game could use one of those money sinks in the form of a way to buy those materials using Ordo Dockets. Not saying it should be cheap, but a way of converting the ever-present dockets that the player will eventually run out of things to spend it on into the other materials that are super difficult to grind for but are needed to upgrade weapons is something the game needs. Players will not only appreciate this so much, but this simple fix will alleviate one of the most frustrating parts of the game. Also, it would be a good idea to merge the two resources into one, as they are both used for the same thing. Either make it only one resource or split what each one does. Make plasteel affect perks while diamantine affects blessings. If they're both used for the same purpose, then one makes the other pointless. God, Game Design 101 people! Now, the final pain points I'd like to discuss in this video have to do with the world. For one, I'd like to cease my whining to really commend the environment and level designers on really bringing the world aesthetic to an absolutely amazing height. Seriously, the environments and world detail are phenomenal. The characters' aesthetic designs are absolutely flavorful, with amazing detail taken to bring the visual designs of 40k to life. But this leads me to the other half of this topic, the lack of soul and vapid nature of the characters. The characters in this game lack any depth aside from being tropes. Some of them have voice lines that make you giggle. In fact, the Mechanicum lady Hadron has a lot of these, but largely they leave you feeling like there could have been more to the character there. Take, for example, some of the random musings of the various key figures upon the Mourningstar.
We need you in the wardroom. Yeah? Let me get this lot on the way and I'll be right with you.
They are mostly one line each out of two characters, and are so largely uninspired and lacking of body that it just leaves the player wanting for more development, or at least inference of their characters. Not to mention the plot, or rather, the complete lack of one. It's extremely disappointing to be playing a game with such detail given to the world, while taking into account its origins, that doesn't even begin to have an impactful plot. There is one small, and I mean small, plot in 4 of the cutscenes that you are presented with while leveling up that detail a traitor on the ship that ends with them being found and killed. That small plot, all of which the player had absolutely no involvement in besides seeing themselves in the cutscenes talking to someone who tells them, "We don't know if it's you or not, go do some missions." Where's the overarching plot? Where are the missions that lead into other missions? Where is any sense of progression? Where is the campaign? This is where the game is seriously lacking right now, an actual story to tell. Not only is there no story, but there's nothing the player can even glean as a story between the missions. The missions are all just arbitrary tasks the players are sent on to deal with one singular issue that is happening at that moment. It's never linked to another mission, nor does the thing that has been done affect anyone in any way, as it's just going to be a mission people are doing again when the problem occurs again. It seems like this is the theme the game is going for, and I'm not against it, but there needs to be a couple of campaign sets that combine a few of the missions back to back. Maybe 3 missions that connect to each other in which the players raid a location looking for someone, then can't find him, so then they need to sneak into a location and steal information or scan for clues as to the man's whereabouts. And then finally a mission in which the players confront the man and give him the God Emperor's justice. The players need something that they can grab onto as some sort of story or plot, especially in conjunction with their gameplay. Otherwise, everything just ends up feeling largely empty and soulless. Speaking of emptiness in the game world, why is the lobby designed the way it is? The Mourningstar is this spaceship lobby that the players can run around in and go to the shops before signing up for and heading out on a mission. In here, players want to meet up with their friends and other players and chat before a mission, but for some reason when you join the party of a friend, it doesn't put you in the same lobby as them. You appear in the same lobby after you get out of a mission, but players are often most excited to see their friends when they first get into the game. This is a small nitpick, but honestly, it just adds to the whole theme of the game feeling vapid and soulless. Now, I've rambled on a bit, so I think I'm going to end the video on the vapid and soulless note. Seems appropriate, to be honest, and a fair assessment of the game in its current state. The game is very fun, and the foundation of the game is excellent and addicting, but it lacks substance to make it truly feel like a fully rounded experience that you can keep coming back to or crunch at endlessly. Do I recommend you play the game? Yes, but not right now if you want the best experience. The game is super fun to play right now, but it needs more of a player reward loop at the endgame levels with some remedied systems to truly feel like a complete player experience. Let me know what you think in the comments below, and subscribe for more game analysis videos and possibly some voice acting and comedy if you're into that. Cheers!